The cold morning air bit at Officer James Miller's face as he drove his police car slowly through the quiet streets of Westbrook. 3 months had passed since his father's funeral, and 2 weeks since Emma had packed her things and left their home of 8 years. The wedding ring mark on his finger was finally fading, but the emptiness inside him only grew stronger each day. James hadn't slept well in weeks. Dark circles hung under his eyes, and his uniform felt tighter around his middle. His fellow officers had stopped asking if he was okay. The answer was always the same forced smile and, "I'm fine." Today marked his first day back on regular patrol after being assigned to desk duty. Captain Brooks had been concerned about his state of mind, but the department was short-staffed, and James had insisted he was ready to return. "Just drive around Plymouth Avenue and keep an eye on things," the captain had said. "There's a film crew setting up in that area. Nothing too demanding." As James turned onto Plymouth Avenue, he noticed the film trucks and equipment lining the street. Several people, with badges and headsets, hurried about, checking cameras and lights. The neighborhood had been transformed overnight into a busy workplace. James parked his car and decided to walk around. The coffee in his hand had gone cold, much like his mood. He watched as crew members moved equipment, talking and laughing with each other. It reminded him of when things had been good with Emma, when laughter came easily. At the edge of the film area, James noticed a man in dark clothes standing near some expensive-looking camera equipment. The man wore a baseball cap pulled low and kept looking around as if checking if anyone was watching him. James felt a familiar tension rise in his chest. The man didn't have a visible crew badge like the others. "Another thief, thinking he can take advantage of the chaos," James muttered to himself. Last month, the department had dealt with several cases of stolen film equipment from various shooting locations. James approached slowly, his hand resting on his belt. The man was now bending down near a case, his back to the officer. "Excuse me, sir," James called out, his voice sharper than usual. "Can I see some identification?" The man turned quickly, seeming startled. He was bearded with longish dark hair under the cap. He smiled politely and reached inside his jacket. In that split second, something inside James snapped. All he saw was a suspicious man reaching inside his clothing near valuable equipment. All the pain, fear, and anger of the past months came rushing forward like a wave. "Stop! Hands where I can see them!" James shouted, drawing his baton. The man looked confused. "I'm just getting my—" James didn't let him finish. With a swift movement, he struck the man across the shoulder with his baton. The man fell to one, a look of shock on his face. "On the ground now," James ordered, adrenaline pumping through his veins. "Wait, there's been a mistake," the man said calmly, despite the pain clear on his face. "I'm Keanu Reeves. I'm working on the film." James froze. Looking more carefully at the face beneath the cap and beard, his stomach dropped. The man on the ground was indeed the famous actor. Around them, crew members had stopped working. Several had phones raised, recording everything. "Mr. Reeves, James began, suddenly aware of what he had done. A woman with a headset rushed over. "What are you doing? This is Keanu Reeves. He's the star of the film." 2 crew members helped Keanu to his feet. He winced as he rolled his shoulder where the baton had struck him. "I thought he was trying to steal equipment," James said weakly, his baton now hanging limply at his side. He reached inside his jacket suddenly. "For this," Keanu said quietly, pulling out an ID card with the film company logo and his photo. "I was just checking the lighting setup before we started shooting." By now, a small crowd had gathered. Phones recorded everything. James could almost feel his career ending in real time. "Officer, we'll need your badge number," one of the producers said firmly. "This is completely unacceptable." James nodded numbly, providing his information. Already people were making calls. Someone mentioned police brutality and racism loud enough for everyone to hear. James wanted to explain that it wasn't about race. It was about his own broken life clouding his judgment, but he knew no one would listen now. As he walked back to his patrol car, messages were already pinging on his phone. The videos were spreading online. By the time he reached the station, Captain Brooks was waiting with a grim expression. "Turn in your badge and gun, Miller," he said. "You're suspended pending investigation." James handed them over without a word. Through the station windows, he could see news vans already pulling up outside. One mistake. One terrible moment when his pain had made him see danger where there was none. Now his face would be known across the country for all the wrong reasons, and a good man had been hurt because of his broken heart. The small slip of paper with the community center's telephone number sat on Thomas Wilson's kitchen table for 3 long days. Every morning he would stare at it while sipping his tea, then walk away. Every evening he would pick it up, hold the phone in his hand, then place both back down with a heavy sigh. His cottage felt too quiet since Margaret had gone. The ticking of the old clock on the wall seemed to grow louder each day, marking time that now stretched endlessly before him. On the 4th morning, Thomas finished his tea and looked at the family photo on the wall. Margaret smiled back at him, her eyes kind even in the faded picture. "What would you do?" he asked the empty room. The answer came to him in Margaret's gentle voice. "The brave thing, Tommy. Always the brave thing." With shaking fingers, Thomas dialed the number. It rang 3 times before a cheerful voice answered. "Oakville Community Center, this is Emma speaking." Thomas cleared his throat. "Hello, I'm Thomas Wilson. I saw your flyer about needing volunteers." "Oh, wonderful." The woman sounded genuinely pleased. "We've been hoping someone would call. Have you done volunteer work before, Mr. Wilson?" "No," Thomas admitted. "I'm retired now. My wife always did the volunteer work in our family, but she passed recently." A moment of silence followed. When Emma spoke again, her voice was softer. "I'm very sorry for your loss, Mr. Wilson. Sometimes helping others can help us too. We need someone for our children's reading program on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. Would that interest you?" Thomas hadn't been around children much. The thought made him nervous, but something pushed him forward. "Yes, I think I could do that." "Wonderful, we'd love to have you, Mr. Wilson. Can you start tomorrow, around 1 o'clock? Thomas agreed before he could change his mind. That night, he slept poorly. What if the children didn't like him? What if he made a fool of himself? By morning, he had nearly talked himself out of going, but the thought of another empty day in the cottage was even worse. At 12:30, Thomas put on his best sweater, dark blue wool that Margaret had given him 2 Christmases ago. He polished his glasses and combed his thinning grey hair carefully. In the mirror, an old man with worried eyes stared back at him. The community centre was a 10-minute walk from his cottage. The red brick building had colourful handprints painted around the entrance door. Thomas stood outside for several minutes, gathering his courage before finally pushing the door open. Inside, the walls were covered with children's artwork. Bright splashes of paint, wobbly drawings of families and animals, paper chains hanging from the ceiling. It smelled of paint and glue and something sweet being baked somewhere in the building. Thomas approached the front desk, where a young man directed him to room 3. His knees felt weak as he made his way down the hallway. Outside room 3, he paused, again hearing children's voices inside. His hand hovered over the doorknob. For a moment he considered turning around and going home. "You must be Mr. Wilson." Thomas turned to see a woman in her 40s with curly brown hair and a warm smile, approaching him. "I'm Emma Parker. We spoke on the phone. I'm so glad you came." She extended her hand and Thomas shook it, noticing her firm, confident grip. "I'm not sure I'll be any good at this," he admitted quietly. Emma's smile didn't falter. "The only qualification is caring, Mr. Wilson. The rest will come naturally." She opened the door to a bright room with small tables and chairs. 5 children, ranging from about 5 to 9 years old, looked up as they entered. Colourful bookshelves lined one wall, and a reading corner with cushions occupied another. "Children, this is Mr. Wilson. He's going to be our new reading volunteer," Emma announced. Thomas's hands trembled as he hung his coat on the hook by the door. His mouth felt dry as the children studied him with curious eyes. "Mr. Wilson, welcome." Emma guided him to a comfortable chair in the reading corner. "The children are excited to meet you. Why don't you sit here?" Thomas sat awkwardly, his tall frame looking out of place in the child-sized space. The children gathered around him, sitting cross-legged on the cushions. Thomas noticed his hands were shaking and quickly folded them in his lap. A little girl with blonde pigtails tied with red ribbons moved closest to him. She had bright blue eyes and was missing her 2 front teeth. "I'm Lucy," she said. handing him a book with a colourful cover. "Will you read to us, please? This is my favourite." Thomas took the book, The Adventures of the Brave Little Boat, and opened it. His voice shook as he began to read the first page, barely louder than a whisper. By the third page, he found himself doing different voices for each character, just as he had done years ago when reading to his nephew. The boat spoke in a deep, proud voice, while the seagull had a squeaky, high-pitched tone that made Lucy giggle. When Thomas looked up, all 5 children were watching him with wide, attentive eyes. Even Emma, who had been organizing papers at a small desk, had stopped to listen. For an hour, Thomas read 2 books all the way through. When Emma finally announced that reading time was over, the children groaned in disappointment. "Will you come back on Thursday, Mr. Wilson?" Lucy asked, tugging gently on his sleeve. Yes, I think I will," Thomas replied, surprised to find he meant it. As he walked home in the gentle afternoon sunshine, Thomas realized something remarkable. For 2 whole hours he hadn't thought about his empty cottage or the terrible silence. For 2 hours he hadn't felt the crushing weight of loneliness that had become his constant companion. Instead, there had been stories and children's voices and colourful pictures. There had been Lucy's gap-toothed smile when he'd made the seagull. Voice. There had been something like purpose. Thomas touched his cheek and was surprised to find it dry. For the first time since the funeral, he had gone a whole afternoon without tears. April brought gentle rain showers to Oakville. The grass turned greener, and small flowers pushed through the soil in Thomas Wilson's garden. Inside his cottage, something was changing too. The calendar on his kitchen wall now had small marks on Tuesdays and Thursdays, reading days at the community centre. 6 weeks had passed since Thomas's first day as a volunteer. The walk to the centre, once filled with doubt and fear, had become the best part of his week. He found himself walking a little faster, standing a little straighter. Sometimes he even hummed to himself as he approached the red brick building. On Mondays and Wednesdays, Thomas worked in his garden, planting Margaret's favourite flowers, but his mind often wandered to stories he wanted to share with the children. He began visiting the town library, carefully selecting books he thought Lucy, Oliver, and the others might enjoy. Mrs. Jenkins at the library noticed the change in him. "You're looking well, Thomas," she said one afternoon as he checked out a stack of books. "It's good to see you smile again." Thomas hadn't realized he was smiling. The heavy fog of grief that had surrounded him for months was slowly lifting, like morning mist giving way to sunshine. At the centre, Emma had given Thomas his own small desk in the corner of the reading room. The children had decorated it with drawings and small handmade gifts, a paper flower from Lucy, a rock painted to look like a frog from Oliver, a bookmark with wobbly letters spelling "Best Reader" from shy little Ben. The children's reading group had grown from 5 to 8. Word had spread about the kind older gentleman who did all the funny voices and never rushed through a story. Thomas found himself looking forward to seeing their bright faces, the way they listened with complete attention when he read. On this particular Tuesday, rain tapped gently against the windows as Thomas arrived at the centre. He shook water from his umbrella and hung up his coat, noticing that Emma looked worried at her desk. "Good afternoon, Emma," he said, arranging his books for the day's session. Emma came over, speaking quietly. "Thomas, I wanted to talk to you before the children arrive. Lucy's going through a difficult time. Her grandmother is very ill in hospital. Cancer, I'm afraid. It doesn't look good." Thomas felt a pang in his heart. Little Lucy, with her pigtails and missing front teeth, had become his favourite, though he tried not to show it. "Her mother almost kept her home today, but Lucy insisted on coming," Emma continued. "She hasn't spoken much since she arrived. I thought you should know." Thomas nodded. "Thank you for telling me." When the other children arrived, they gathered excitedly around Thomas's desk, chattering about their day. Only Lucy sat apart in the corner by the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. "Why don't you all look at the new dinosaur book while I check on Lucy?" Thomas suggested. The children happily moved to the reading corner, while Thomas walked slowly to Lucy's side. He didn't speak at first, just sat in the small chair next to hers, watching the rain. After a few minutes, Lucy leaned slightly against his arm. "My gran. Her's very sick. She finally whispered, her voice small and fragile. "Mum says she might go to heaven soon." Thomas felt his heart ache with a familiar pain. "My wife Margaret went to heaven recently," he said gently. "It hurts very much." Lucy looked up at him, her blue eyes filled with tears. "Does it stop hurting?" Thomas thought carefully. Many well-meaning friends had told him time heals all wounds after Margaret died, but that hadn't felt true or helpful. "The hurt changes," he said honestly, "but the love never goes away. The love stays with you always." Lucy considered this, twisting one pigtail around her finger. "Gran always reads me stories when I visit. Now she's too tired. Maybe she would like you to read to her instead," Thomas suggested. Lucy shook her head. "I'm not good enough yet. I make too many mistakes." "You know," Thomas said, "when Margaret was sick, she loved getting cards. Would you like to make a special card for your Gran? Margaret always said that love is the best medicine." Lucy nodded slowly. Thomas went to Emma's desk and gathered colored paper, markers, and glitter. He brought them back to Lucy's table. "What things does your Gran like?" "Flowers," Lucy said, "yellow ones and butterflies." Together they began creating a card. Thomas showed Lucy how to fold the paper so that a butterfly popped up when it was opened. He helped her draw yellow flowers around the edges. Lucy carefully wrote "I love you, Gran" inside, her tongue sticking out in concentration as she formed each letter. As they worked, Lucy began to talk about her grandmother, how she made the best chocolate biscuits, how she had a garden full of bird feeders, how she knew the names of all the stars. Slowly, Lucy's smile returned. By the time they finished the card, decorated with glitter and surrounded by drawings of flowers, she was telling Thomas about the time her grandmother had dressed up as a witch for Halloween and scared the neighbor's cat. When reading time came, Lucy rejoined the group, sitting close to Thomas and helping him turn the pages. After the session ended and the children were collected by their parents, Lucy's mother came in looking tired and worried. "Lucy made something for Gran," Thomas said, handing over the carefully created card. Lucy's mother looked at it with tears in her eyes. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. We'll take it to her tonight." "Mr. Wilson lost his wife," Lucy told her mother seriously. "He says the hurt changes, but the love stays." Lucy's mother looked at Thomas with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. That evening, Thomas walked home in the gentle rain, not bothering with his umbrella. The cool water on his face felt refreshing somehow. Inside his cottage, he made a simple dinner and ate it at the kitchen table, telling Margaret about his day as if she were sitting across from him. Before bed, Thomas took Margaret's photograph from his pocket, where he had carried it close to his heart every day since the funeral. He looked at her smiling face for a long moment, then gently placed the frame on his bedside table. "I think I'm helping, just like you always did," he whispered to her image. "I think maybe you'd be proud." For the first time in months, Thomas slept peacefully through the night. The first snow of winter fell on Oakville in early December, covering the small town in a blanket of white. Thomas Wilson watched from his living room window as children built snowmen in the park across the street. The sight reminded him of last Christmas, when Margaret was still here. They had sat together on the sofa, drinking hot chocolate and planning their holiday dinner. This year there would be no turkey to cook, no presents to wrap, no Margaret. November had been a good month for Thomas. His reading sessions at the community center had grown. He now volunteered 3 days a week instead of 2. The children brought light to his days, but as Christmas decorations appeared in shop windows and holiday music played in the grocery store, a heaviness returned to his heart. "Will you put up a tree this year, Mr. Wilson?" Lucy had asked during their last reading session before the holiday break. Thomas had smiled and changed the subject. The box of Christmas decorations remained in the attic, untouched. He couldn't bear to open it without Margaret. Emma Parker had noticed his mood change. After the final reading session of the year, she approached him with a kind smile. "Thomas, we're having a Christmas party at the center on the 23rd. Nothing fancy, just some cookies and games with the children. We'd love for you to come." Thomas had thanked her but declined. "I have some old friends visiting," he lied. The truth was he couldn't face the happiness of others when his own heart felt so empty. As Christmas Eve approached, Thomas prepared for a quiet day alone. He bought a small ready-made meal from the market and a bottle of Margaret's favorite, wine. He would toast her memory and go to bed early, hoping to sleep through most of Christmas Day. The cottage felt colder somehow, despite the heating working fine. Thomas wore his thickest sweater and kept the curtains drawn. Outside, neighbors called happy greetings to each other as they hurried home with last-minute gifts. Thomas turned on the radio to drown out their cheerful voices, then quickly turned it off when White Christmas began to play. It had been Margaret's favorite. At 4 o'clock, darkness fell early. Thomas made a simple sandwich for dinner, but found he had little appetite. He sat in his armchair looking at the empty space where their Christmas tree should be. The clock ticked loudly in the silent room. "First Christmas without you, Maggie," he whispered to the empty chair across from him. "I don't know how to do this." A sudden knock at the door startled him. Thomas wasn't expecting anyone. For a moment, he considered not answering. But the knock came again, more insistent this time. With a sigh, Thomas rose and walked slowly to the door. When he opened it, he blinked in surprise at the sight before him. Emma Parker stood on his doorstep, surrounded by a group of children from the reading program. Oliver held a small potted Christmas tree. Lucy and Ben carried bags decorated with holiday pictures. The other children, at least 6 of them, held plates of cookies, handmade decorations, and small wrapped gifts. All wore warm coats and bright smiles. "We brought Christmas to you, Mr. Wilson," Oliver announced proudly, holding up the little tree. Thomas stood speechless, his hand still on the door. "May we come in?" Emma asked gently. "It's rather cold out here." Yes, of course." Thomas stepped back, still stunned. "Please, come in." The children rushed inside, bringing with them the scents of pine, cinnamon, and cold winter air. They removed their boots by the door without being asked and looked around curiously at Thomas's small cottage. "It's very clean," Lucy observed, putting her bag down carefully. "But it needs Christmas," said Ben, already pulling decorations from his bag. Emma hung the children's coats and scarves on the rack by the door. "I hope we're not intruding, Thomas. The children were worried about you spending Christmas alone." Before Thomas could respond, the children had already begun transforming his home. Oliver placed the small tree on the coffee table. Lucy and 2 other girls hung paper snowflakes from the lamp. Ben and another boy arranged a nativity scene on the bookshelf. "Look what I made, Mr. Wilson." A little girl named Penny showed him a handmade ornament with his name painted on it. That's very nice," Thomas managed, his voice tight, with emotion. The children moved through his quiet cottage like a whirlwind of energy and joy. They placed cookies on plates, hung stockings on the mantel, and taped children's drawings to the walls. One boy found Thomas's radio and turned it on, filling the room with soft Christmas music. "We know it's hard without Mrs. Wilson," Emma said, softly, standing beside Thomas as they watched the children. "But you've given so much to these children over the past months. They wanted to give something back." Thomas watched as his somber living room transformed into a place of warmth and life. The children laughed and chattered as they worked, occasionally asking him where things should go, including him in their joy. "Mr. Wilson, will you help me reach?" Lucy asked, holding a paper star. Thomas lifted her up so she could place it on top of the small tree. When the decorating was finished, the children gathered around Thomas's kitchen table, which was now covered with plates of cookies, small sandwiches Emma had brought, and cups of hot chocolate. "We should sing carols," Oliver suggested, mouthful of cookie. "After you swallow," Emma reminded him with a smile. The children sang Jingle Bells and Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, their young voices filling Thomas's cottage with music, for the first time in many months. Thomas found himself humming along, then singing softly. After the singing, Lucy approached Thomas with a carefully wrapped package. "This is from all of us," she said, suddenly shy. Thomas unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a framed drawing, a colorful picture of Thomas surrounded by all the children from the reading group. At the bottom, each child had signed their name in wobbly letters. "You're our family too now," Lucy said, watching his face. Thomas felt tears form in his eyes, but for the first time since Margaret's death, they weren't only tears of sadness. There was something else there too, a warmth he had almost forgotten. "Do you like it?" Lucy asked, worried by his silence. "I love it," Thomas said, his voice rough with emotion. "It's the best gift I've ever received." As the evening continued, Thomas found himself watching the children play a board game on his living room floor. Their laughter filled spaces in his home and heart that had been empty for too long. On the mantel above them sat Margaret's photograph, her smile seeming brighter somehow in the glow of Christmas lights. "Thank you," Thomas whispered, not just to the visitors who had brought Christmas back to his home, but to Margaret as well. Somehow he felt certain she had a hand in this small miracle. The morning frost disappeared from Oakville. As March turned to April, tiny green shoots pushed through the soil in gardens across town. Birds returned from their winter travels, filling the air with cheerful songs. Spring had arrived, bringing new life and hope. In the garden behind his small cottage, Thomas Wilson knelt in the soft earth, carefully planting seeds. These were not just any flowers, but Margaret's favorites: bright yellow sunflowers, purple lavender, and pink roses. His hands, once shaky with grief, now worked with purpose. "These will look beautiful by summer, Maggie," he said softly, patting the soil around a young rosebush. Talking to Margaret had become easier over the months. Sometimes he could almost hear her laughing reply. Thomas no longer spent his days alone. The community center had become his second home. What began as 2 afternoons of reading had grown to 4 full days of volunteering. Besides reading to the children, he now helped with art projects, organized books, and even taught some of the older children to play chess, a game Margaret had always beaten him at. The center hummed with activity each day. Lucy had lost another tooth and proudly showed Thomas her gap-toothed smile. Oliver had won a school science fair with a project about birds that Thomas had helped him research. Shy Ben had finally started reading aloud to the group, his confidence growing with each session. One Tuesday afternoon, Thomas arrived at the center to find Emma looking worried at her desk. Papers covered with numbers and red marks lay before her. "Is something wrong?" Thomas asked, hanging up his jacket. Emma sighed. "The center's funding has been cut again. I don't know how we'll keep going past summer." "Close the center?" Thomas felt his heart sink. "But what about the children? What about all the programs?" "I know," Emma said. "I've tried everything. We need more money than bake sales can bring in. The town council meets Thursday night to discuss community funding. I'm going to speak, but—" She trailed off, looking defeated. Thomas thought about what the center meant to him, to Lucy, to Oliver, to all the children. "I'll come with you," he said firmly. The town hall was crowded on Thursday evening. Thomas sat nervously beside Emma. As the mayor discussed road repairs, summer festivals, and finally community program funding. "As you can see," the mayor said, pointing to a chart, "we simply don't have enough in the budget for all our programs. Some difficult decisions must be made." Emma stood to speak about the center's importance, but her quiet voice barely carried in the large room. When she finished, the council members nodded politely, but continued shuffling papers. Thomas felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Before he could think twice, he rose to his feet. "May I say something?" he asked, his voice stronger than he expected. The surprised mayor nodded. Thomas cleared his throat. "My name is Thomas Wilson. Many of you knew my wife Margaret, who passed away last year." He paused, feeling dozens of eyes on him. "After she died, I didn't want to live anymore. I existed, but I wasn't living." The room fell silent. Even the shuffling papers stopped. "Then I found the community center. Or rather, the children found me." Thomas's voice grew stronger with each word. "These children need this place. The single parents need somewhere safe for their children to go after school. The older folks who volunteer there need purpose. A few months ago, I was just a lonely old man with nothing to give. These children gave me purpose again." Thomas saw heads nodding around the room. "I understand budgets. I worked in accounting for 40 years. But some things can't be measured in dollars. How do you measure a child's smile? How do you put a price on belonging? We cannot let this center close. We must find a way." When Thomas sat down, his hands were shaking, but this time from excitement rather than fear. Emma squeezed his arm, her eyes bright with tears. What happened next surprised everyone. Mrs. Jenkins from the library stood up and pledged a donation. Then Mr. Parker, the hardware store owner, offered to fix the center's leaky roof for free. More hands went up. More offers came. By meeting's end, enough money and services had been promised to keep the center running for another year. The next day, a reporter from the Oakville Gazette interviewed Thomas. The newspaper ran a front-page story titled, "Widower Finds New Family at Community Center." More donations poured in. The center was saved. As May approached, Thomas thought about the coming anniversary of Margaret's death. Last year, he had spent that day alone, lost in grief. This year would be different. On that sunny Saturday, Thomas hosted a garden party. Emma came with her husband. Lucy arrived with her parents and her grandmother, who had recovered enough to attend. Oliver brought his family. Even shy Ben came, proudly carrying a book to show Thomas. The garden bloomed with Margaret's flowers. Children played on the grass while adults chatted on chairs Thomas had borrowed from neighbors. "Margaret would have loved this," said Mrs. Jenkins, who had known them both for years. Thomas smiled, watching Lucy and Oliver helping to serve cake to the guests. "She would have adored all of you," he said. "She always said a house needs children's laughter to make it a home." Later, as the sun began to set and guests prepared to leave, Thomas stood in his garden surrounded by people who had become dear to him. He realized something important. His grief hadn't disappeared. It was still there, a part of him. But it had transformed into something new, a deeper appreciation for connection and a determination to keep Margaret's spirit of kindness alive through his own actions. Lucy hugged him goodbye. "See you Tuesday, Mr. Wilson." "I'll be there," Thomas promised, his heart full. Sometimes he thought as he waved to his departing guests, the greatest healing comes not from moving on, but from bringing others along on your journey. The end.